Welcome everyone to our Quilts Equals Art Equals Quilts Artist Talks. I'm joined today by Natalya Khorover from Pleasantville, New York. Natalya is known for reclaiming and repurposing single-use plastic materials in her work. And her piece, Iron Spine 6XL, won the Schweinfurth Award this year. So Natalya, can you tell us a little bit about the piece in the show?
Well, it fits into my Iron Spine series, which is quite extensive. I've lost track of the numbers, but it's all about fire escapes because to me, well, there's something I love about the graphic nature of a fire escape. I think of it as a spine to the city, like it holds up the city, so to speak, to me. And I have enjoyed portraying it, well, in plastic, which I think is a nice irony because it's made out of iron and it rusts, but I'm making it out of plastic and that does not decay at all. So Iron Spine 6XL is the second of the large Iron Spine pieces, and it's made out of a piece of vintage linen, which is a linen bed sheet circa 1950, Soviet Union. It came from my grandmother's closet. It was mended by her and I mended it some more. The background of it is constructed from scraps of fabrics. I'm a former costume designer and fashion designer, so I have little bits of fabrics that I hold dear and I don't throw out. I hold on to them. So the background is constructed from all of those fabrics and some vintage laces as well. And then the foreground, which is the fire escape, is made out of the single-use plastic mesh that you'll find in a supermarket when you buy your bag of onions or a bag of some other fruit or vegetable.
Yeah. So one thing that I mentioned that you're known for is using, single-use plastic, reclaimed vintage materials. Why is that important to you?
Well, I grew up thrifty. I was born in Soviet Union in Leningrad, and if you are a regular citizen, were a regular citizen in the Soviet Union and still now too, you learn to make do, because unless you are a highly placed party official or something, you don't have access to a lot of things that we're used to here. To me, the excesses of life in the Western world, as pleasurable as they may be, I find them unnecessary. And while perhaps in my daily life, they're hard to avoid, I try to avoid them in my art. And I like to be able to use whatever I have on hand, something that might otherwise be in the trash. Somebody else will throw it out. Even vintage linen, somebody else will think this is, a dirty old piece of fabric. Who needs it? While I would rather reclaim it and make it into something beautiful.
I see the elements of the vintage linen, and I recognize that, in fact, that is kind of a popular pattern, that blue stripe in certain linens. I recognize those things, but they really come together and kind of congeal into an overall, the image of the fire escape. Can you talk a little bit about how you begin to piece them together and what that process is for you?
So every work that I do is a little bit different, but I can tell you about this one specifically. So in this case, there are two fire escapes on there, and one of them is sort of faded in the background. So I made that one first, and what I did was I frequently start my work in Photoshop. I work from photographs that I've collected over the years. So I chose a fire escape that I had an image one that I liked for that piece, and I printed out life size, and I made basically a what's the word, a mock-up of it, and I traced it onto the linen just with some hand stitches. So I made an outline of it so that I could build the so-called brick wall out of the scraps all around it and not cover up that fire escape. So I had it on my design wall over here, the whole thing, and I emptied my basket of scraps and chose what visually appealed to me in the scheme of color from light to dark to the bottom. And I pinned every piece, and I ironed every piece, even the little ones. And then once I had everything pinned in place where I wanted it, I took it off the wall, put it on my work table, and stitched the whole thing by hand. And it was because I wanted to do it by hand. It was just, I wanted to continue that whole handmade quality of it. I originally thought I would make the whole piece completely by hand, but I wound up adding machine stitching to it. So once I had the scraps built up and secured by hand, I put it back up on my design wall. And I wanted to do the second fire escape, which I knew I wanted to do out of the mesh, because I wanted it to be sort of transparent slightly, like the mesh is, so you could see the fabrics underneath. So again, I made another mock-up of another fire escape, life size, and I laid it on, and I traced the outlines of it just with thread. And then I gathered all my mesh bags, and I tried to make sure I had a nice gradation of color, and I pinned them all in place. And that's where I wound up using the sewing machine, because the mesh was it was too hard to pin it down by hand. So it was easier to pin it all down, do an outline of it, just tack it in places with my machine, and then come back and do some more handwork for details.
You do have a lot of really beautiful hand-stitched parts of your work. What is that urge to put your hand into it that way?
Well, to start with, I have very fond memories of my grandmother teaching me how to mend.
Mm-hmm.
Just mending socks, nothing major. But there's just something, well, it's tactile, first of all. It's just something about being able to work with your hands and create something that didn't exist, or you make it better. And to me, it's also a very meditative process. I mean, sometimes I can just be stitching and get lost in my own thoughts, and all sorts of sometimes solutions come to mind if I'm working out a problem or something, or I can get lost in listening to a book or a podcast as I'm stitching, and time just flies by.
Yeah. Is sewing plastic, is that difficult? Is there like a trick to it, or no?
No, not at all. I just usually pin it down and go right to town with it, If I'm making a small piece, I like to use an interfacing. I use like a Pellin interfacing, which is stiff, and it kind of like, even if I stitch it by machine or by hand, I don't even need a hoop or anything, so it works well. And even if I use a big piece of linen, I usually just layer the plastic right on it. I pin it and I free motion stitch it. It doesn't need anything else. It usually holds up well, and I'm usually using more than one layer of plastic, so that makes it even stronger. If I'm cutting out little pieces of plastic, then I will use a matte medium, which is a glue, to keep it all together so it doesn't slide around. But with bigger pieces, I don't bother.
We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what draws you to the plastic? It seems to function both as, it's transparent and it creates this aesthetic quality that you like, but also you seem to have like a message about, you had in your artist statement, the underpinnings of social and political narratives. So the use of that, it starts to talk in a different way. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Over the last 20 years, I have noticed just how much plastic there is in our society. I started saving plastic bags initially because of the pretty colors, and somewhere along the way I figured out I can also, stitch on them, and they held up quite well. And then I've done some research, and I've realized just how bad plastic pollution is in this world. No matter what your opinion may be on the realities of climate change, plastic pollution cannot be denied. It's everywhere. It's quite prevalent. All you got to do is, you know, scan the web for a bunch of photographs, and it's pretty sad what's out there. So I've taken some courses learning about plastic pollution and climate change, and I have just been learning a lot about it over the years. So it's sort of like, to me, by using the plastics, I am saving a small portion of them of winding up in our rivers and oceans, and also bringing a bit of awareness to the problem.
You also mentioned, you know, the use of plastic to portray like these urban scenes like the fire escape, and a lot of the imagery you use are either fire escapes or bridges or you know, the infrastructure of a city and graffiti. Where do you begin? Where do you take your inspiration from? Do you go out and find these images and you say you work from photographs? Do you take the photographs?
So they're all my own photographs. So I've grown up in New York City since 1979. I've always been immersed in it. I certainly think of myself as a New Yorker, and I love the city very much, even though I live in suburbia now. But every time I go into the city, and now with an iPhone in my pocket, it's so easy. So whenever I see anything that's appealing to me, I take a photograph. I guess I'm just always drawn to cities. I'm a city girl. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia. So as much as I love countryside and beautiful vistas, I'm at heart a city girl. So I just love everything urban. The juxtapositions of the old and the new buildings, and graffiti is inspiring to me too. It's just, it's another artistic expression. Sometimes legal, sometimes not, but it's always so full of energy. And that's what I love about the city, is just how much energy it always has. It's pulsating with action.
I also was looking at your installations, and that was really fascinating to me, especially the one that was outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this plastic, and there was a photo of it being, you know, rained on a little, and I really enjoyed that tension. Can you tell me a little bit about that body of work?
That was the Rye Art Center. I was part of a fiber exhibit indoors, and when I visited the center and I spoke with the curator, I, you know, suggested to her, I was like, what about a piece outdoors? How about an installation? And she was very gung-ho about it, and so was the art center administrative team. And I got this opportunity to do an installation outside on their front lawn. So I wanted to see just how big I could do a fire escape. And I wanted to create it mostly out of clear single-use plastic, so the light would shine through it. I mean, I intended to cut portions of it out as well. So that's what I did. It was approximately 17 feet by 17 feet. And we put up wires up in these. They had these two big, I think one was a pine tree, the other one might have been an oak, I don't remember. But we strung a wire at the very top and hung the piece from there, and then strung a wire at the bottom to attach it. And it held up quite well. It was out there for 2 months, and you know, it's plastic. It did quite well in the weather, and the raindrops looked lovely on it. I thoroughly enjoyed that experiment.
I see behind you, you have like the perfect sewer studio with, you know, lots of thread. Do you mind showing us around a little bit? Move the camera about?
Sure. It's a little bit of a mess, but not too bad.
I think that's what's exciting.
Right. So this is kind of, I have a couple of Singer tables. So this is my felting machine is back there. This is my beading supplies. So there's the other machine there. That's my serger. And I have unfinished and finished projects on the wall, and I have quite the thread selection. And here's a big lamp. And that's back here is my workhorse Bernina. That's my, there it is. It's my industrial Bernina that I do most of my work on. And those cubbies on the wall right there are where I collect my thread snippings, thread waste, so nothing goes to waste. This is a collection of thimbles and things I have, and my inspiration board that I add to. Let's see. That's my ironing station back there, and more lamps. I'm working on I'm doing virtual workshops these days. That's why there's these. This is my cell phone holder for my virtual workshops. That's why there's so many lamps here these days, is because whether I'm taping something for a virtual workshop or I'm teaching one, you want to make sure there's a lot of light and multiple camera angles.
Yeah, it's a whole new world that is. What's next for you? Are there any new projects on the horizon? Where do you see your imagery or your inspiration or your material use going?
Well, I certainly see it continuing with the plastic, because there's still so much of it out there, even with the ban in New York State on the plastic bags going back into effect since the pandemic. There's still so much of it out there. I mean, you buy a roll of paper towels at the store and it's wrapped in plastic, so it's everywhere. So I think I see certainly continuing to work with that materials. I would love to do more installations, whether indoors or outdoors. I really enjoy making large size artwork. Aside from the large pieces and installation, I do a lot of small, intimate work.
Mm-hmm.
I make commissioned home portraits for people, where I use the ephemera they provide to make art that's really personal to them. And it's usually with a photograph of their home that I interpret and stitch. So I do those kind of things. What else? Oh, well, once the pandemic is over, I'm hoping to go back to being a visiting artist in schools and making art with children out of the single-use plastic and educating them about it as well.
It's been wonderful talking to you. If you guys want to see more of what Natalya does, you can visit her website. And thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is my pleasure. It was lovely talking to you.